The first time the world fully glimpsed the scale of the danger facing Jewish communities in Europe, the signs were already impossible to ignore. Newspapers reported daily on the mounting restrictions in Germany: shops closed, children barred from schools, synagogues desecrated. But even those distant accounts could not capture the depth of fear that gripped families. In the early 1930s, Adolf Hitler rose to power, promising not only a new Germany but also the elimination of Jewish influence from every aspect of public and private life. Jews, who had lived for centuries across Central and Eastern Europe, suddenly found themselves stripped of rights, property, and security. Each day brought new laws, new edicts, new humiliations, and for many, the sense that the continent they had called home for generations was no longer theirs to inhabit. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 codified discrimination in ways that shattered normal life. Citizenship was revoked, marriages between Jews and non-Jews were forbidden, businesses and professions were restricted. The streets became dangerous, not only from the ever-present risk of arrest or confiscation but also from the creeping violence of Nazi supporters. Jews faced social exclusion and public scorn, often compounded by neighbors turning against them under pressure or fear. For many families, the looming question was not if, but when, survival would demand leaving the lands of their birth. Those who could, began planning exits that would often take months or years to execute, navigating a world that was closing its doors even as Europe was tearing itself apart. Yet escaping Europe was far from simple. Countries such as Britain, the United States, Canada, and Australia maintained strict quotas, offering visas only to those who could meet rigid requirements. Families were required to provide affidavits of support, financial guarantees, or professional credentials that most ordinary Jews could not access. Every refusal, delay, or bureaucratic obstruction could mean the difference between life and death. Organizations like the Joint Distribution Committee worked tirelessly to assist families in this struggle, providing financial aid, letters of sponsorship, and logistical guidance. Still, the process was arduous, and time was an enemy that accelerated with each passing month. Among the destinations that offered both hope and practical refuge, Palestine emerged as a central focus. Under the British Mandate, Jewish migration was tightly regulated, and British authorities issued certificates that allowed only a limited number of newcomers each year. Despite these restrictions, Jews from Poland, Romania, Germany, and other countries braved clandestine routes, often smuggling themselves in overcrowded ships across the Mediterranean, a movement called Aliyah Bet. The journey was dangerous. Storms, disease, and interception by British patrols threatened the lives of immigrants at every turn. Yet reaching Palestine represented more than physical safety, it was a chance to rebuild a community, contribute to settlements and kibbutzim, and participate in the vision of a Jewish homeland that could never be taken away. Each arrival added to the labor, culture, and resilience of a society that was growing from survival into aspiration. The United States also became a beacon of hope, though not without obstacles. American immigration laws imposed strict quotas and favored Western Europeans, limiting opportunities for Jews fleeing from Eastern Europe. Obtaining a visa often required months of negotiation, sponsorship by relatives or charitable organizations, and proof of economic means that devastated families struggling to survive. Those who reached American shores faced the challenges of adjustment, new languages, unfamiliar urban environments, and the difficulty of finding employment in cities still grappling with the aftershocks of the Great Depression. Yet once they settled, Jewish communities in New York, Chicago, and other metropolitan centers provided networks of support housing, schooling, employment assistance, and social integration, all while preserving religious and cultural life. When World War II erupted in 1939, the urgency to flee intensified dramatically. The German invasion of Poland, and later much of Western Europe, brought the horrors of mass deportations, ghettos, forced labor, and systematic murder. Millions of Jews suddenly found themselves trapped under regimes committed to their extermination. Survival increasingly depended on quick escape, often across multiple borders under dangerous circumstances. Networks of smugglers, humanitarian organizations, and sympathetic individuals became lifelines, coordinating routes, forging documents, and arranging transport for those desperate to survive. For many, each successful flight was not just a matter of survival but a reclamation of dignity, identity, and the possibility of a future. In Palestine, the wartime years saw an influx of refugees that transformed the social and economic landscape. New arrivals built agricultural settlements, established schools, and formed social networks that intertwined with pre-existing Jewish communities. Each immigrant contributed skills, labor, and cultural knowledge, shaping a society that balanced the necessity of survival with the long-term goal of nation building. Clashes with British authorities were common, as official immigration limits were often exceeded, and attempts to intercept ships led to arrests, detention, and even deportation. Yet the determination of Jewish migrants, aided by international advocacy, ensured that Palestine became a sanctuary for those whose lives had been shattered. In the United States, Jewish communities responded to the wartime crisis by both welcoming refugees and advocating for policy changes. Established immigrants and American Jews created support systems that assisted newcomers with housing, employment, schooling, and cultural adjustment. They also raised awareness about the atrocities in Europe, petitioning the government to relax quotas and allow more refugees to enter legally. These efforts gradually increased opportunities for Jewish families to settle in the U.S., offering a lifeline in a world otherwise engulfed by violence and displacement. By 1945, as Allied forces liberated occupied territories, the scale of displacement became staggering. Millions of survivors emerged from ghettos, concentration camps, and forced labor sites, often with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Displaced persons, DP, camps were established across Germany, Austria, and Italy, providing shelter, food, and medical aid. Despite the grim conditions, these camps became centers of revival, with survivors establishing schools, religious services, newspapers, and social organizations. Each camp was a temporary home and a springboard for future migration, as survivors sought to resettle in Palestine, the United States, Canada, or other countries where they could begin life anew. This first chapter of Jewish migration during and after World War II tells a story of desperation, resilience, and hope. It is a narrative of people navigating bureaucratic obstacles, geographic barriers, and the constant shadow of annihilation, determined to survive and rebuild. From the ghettos of Warsaw to the shores of Palestine and the ports of New York, Jewish families pursued life against staggering odds, creating networks, communities, and institutions that would endure for generations. The journeys of this era reshaped global Jewish demographics, sowed the seeds of the modern state of Israel, and transformed societies in ways that reverberated long after the war had ended. Survival, for these refugees, was only the first step. The reconstruction of identity, culture, and community became the true testament to their endurance in the aftermath of unimaginable suffering. Journey to New Horizons. By the end of World War II, Europe lay in ruins, its cities shattered, its societies fractured, and its people traumatized beyond imagination. For the surviving Jewish population, the war had stripped away not only their homes but their very sense of belonging. Entire communities had been erased, families torn apart, and centuries of cultural heritage left in ashes. For millions, returning to pre-war homes was impossible. The landscapes of memory had been replaced by the reality of mass destruction. What remained was a desperate search for safety, identity, and a future that could be claimed beyond the borders of a continent that had become hostile to life itself. Displaced persons camps quickly became the epicenters of Jewish life in post-war Europe. These camps, spread across Germany, Austria, and Italy, offered temporary refuge for those who had survived ghettos, forced labor, or the death camps. Though conditions were often crowded and resources scarce, the camps became places of organization, culture, and education. Survivors created schools, religious institutions, theaters, and newspapers. Every effort was a bid to preserve humanity and rebuild community. Within these confines, people began to discuss plans for migration, debating which paths could offer long-term security: Palestine, the United States, Canada, Australia, or South America. These decisions were no longer just about survival, they were about carving a future where life could flourish again. Palestine, under British mandate, emerged as a primary destination for Jewish refugees, both during and after the war. The Zionist movement had strengthened significantly during the conflict, advocating vigorously for a Jewish homeland that could absorb the survivors. Organizations coordinated clandestine operations to bring displaced Jews across the Mediterranean, often on overcrowded ships with limited supplies, risking interception by British naval patrols. These voyages were perilous, but they represented the promise of land, community, and the ability to live without the constant fear of persecution. As the waves of immigrants arrived, they integrated into agricultural settlements, kibbutzim, and urban neighborhoods, infusing the local economy and society with labor, skills, and the cultural richness of diverse European Jewish traditions. The British authorities, meanwhile, remained cautious and often restrictive, wary of the demographic shift that mass immigration could produce. Certificates for legal entry were limited, creating a shadow economy of smuggling and clandestine movement. Yet, the determination of refugees and the coordination of Jewish agencies ensured that thousands continued to arrive, each new arrival carrying the weight of survival and the hope for a future built on self-determination. By the late 1940s, these migrations had reshaped Palestine's demographics, laying critical foundations for the eventual establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. The post-war period was marked not only by the logistical challenge of moving people across continents but also by the psychological weight of rebuilding lives after trauma that few could comprehend. Across the Atlantic, the United States presented both opportunity and challenge. During the war, American immigration laws had limited entry, leaving many Jews trapped in Europe. However, following the war, the U.S. passed the Displaced Persons Act in 1948, allowing tens of thousands of Jewish survivors to enter legally. For many, this represented a lifeline after years in DP camps or in war-torn cities. The journey to America was arduous, involving long sea voyages and complicated paperwork, but the promise of security and the chance to rebuild life made it an irresistible goal. Once on U.S. soil, immigrants faced the challenge of assimilation while preserving cultural identity. Established Jewish communities in cities such as New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles provided support systems, from housing and employment to language education and religious institutions, helping newcomers adapt while retaining connection to their heritage. These migrations were not solely practical but deeply symbolic. Every journey to Palestine or the United States was an assertion of life after mass annihilation, a rejection of the forces that sought to erase Jewish existence. Families reunited, communities reconstituted, and new networks formed across continents, creating a global Jewish diaspora that was resilient, adaptive, and determined to survive. The experience of migration also prompted a re-evaluation of identity and belonging. Survivors had to navigate the trauma of displacement while forging connections in societies that were often unfamiliar or indifferent. For some, Palestine offered a sense of rootedness tied to history and culture. For others, America represented a fresh start, opportunity, and safety far from the ruins of Europe. Life in Palestine after the war was both hopeful and complicated. Immigrants faced the dual challenge of building personal lives while participating in the collective project of establishing a homeland. Economic development, education, and political activism were all part of daily life. Settlements expanded, schools flourished, and cultural institutions grew, creating a sense of community forged from shared struggle and collective resilience. These early years were also marked by tension with British authorities, who sought to control immigration and maintain political stability. Yet despite restrictions, the determination of immigrants, combined with international support and the urgency created by the Holocaust, ensured that Palestine remained a central refuge for displaced Jews. In the United States, survivors similarly faced the task of reconstruction. They found work in factories, small businesses, and professional sectors, gradually achieving economic stability. Jewish cultural life flourished in urban centers, with synagogues, schools, and social organizations serving as pillars of community. Survivors shared their experiences, educating Americans about the atrocities in Europe while fostering solidarity among Jewish populations. Many also became politically active, lobbying for refugee aid, international justice, and the establishment of institutions to preserve Holocaust memory. This period of migration thus reshaped American Jewish communities, strengthening social cohesion and fostering a sense of shared responsibility toward those who had survived the war. Yet migration was not without its emotional and psychological toll. Leaving behind homes, communities, and memories exacted a profound cost. Survivors wrestled with grief, loss, and the challenge of creating stability in unfamiliar lands. In DP camps, on ships crossing oceans, and in refugee neighborhoods in Palestine and the United States, Jewish migrants forged resilience from tragedy. Cultural practices, religious observances, and communal institutions became lifelines, maintaining identity amidst uncertainty. The act of migration itself was both survival and transformation, a declaration that despite destruction, Jewish life would continue and evolve. By the late 1940s, the post-war migration had fundamentally altered global Jewish demographics. Large numbers of survivors had resettled in Palestine, where they contributed to the foundation of a new nation. Others had established roots in the United States, integrating into society while maintaining cultural and religious continuity. These movements were more than acts of relocation, they were affirmations of humanity, agency, and resilience. The survivors of the Holocaust not only reclaimed life but actively reshaped the world, influencing politics, society, and culture in profound and lasting ways. Chapter 2, therefore, captures the second phase of Jewish migration, the deliberate, painstaking, and heroic journey from the ruins of Europe to new lands where survival was possible and hope could take root. It is a story of courage, resourcefulness, and determination, illustrating how individuals and communities navigated immense challenges to rebuild their lives. From the overcrowded DP camps to the Mediterranean shores of Palestine, from the docks of New York to urban centers across the United States, Jewish migration after World War II exemplified the human capacity to endure, adapt, and create meaning in the aftermath of catastrophe. Rebuilding lives amid new lands. As the immediate shock of war and displacement began to fade, the focus of Jewish migration shifted from mere survival to the formidable task of rebuilding lives and communities in new lands. For those who had reached Palestine, the challenge was both physical and social. Immigrants arrived exhausted from perilous journeys, many having endured hunger, violence, and the profound trauma of losing family members. Yet they carried with them a determination that would define this chapter of history. villages, kibbutzim, and urban neighborhoods became incubators of resilience, where families sought not just shelter but also a sense of belonging, identity, and continuity. Each new settlement, school, or communal initiative was a testament to the survivors' refusal to let annihilation erase their culture, faith, or heritage. The immigrant communities in Palestine were remarkably diverse. Jews arrived from Eastern Europe, Germany, the Balkans, and North Africa, bringing with them languages, traditions, and customs that had survived despite the war's devastation. Integrating these diverse groups was no simple task. Tensions occasionally arose over cultural differences, religious interpretations, and approaches to labor and governance. Yet the shared experience of survival and the collective goal of establishing a homeland forged strong bonds. Communities built synagogues, community centers, and schools, emphasizing education as a tool not just for personal growth but also for strengthening national identity. Every brick laid, every class taught, and every communal gathering became a small victory in reclaiming dignity and continuity. Agricultural settlements played a central role in this reconstruction. Many Jewish immigrants, particularly those arriving from urbanized regions, faced the daunting challenge of adapting to rural life. The kibbutz system, based on collective labor and shared resources, became a symbol of resilience and determination. Refugees worked tirelessly to cultivate fields, build homes, and develop infrastructure, transforming barren lands into productive communities. These efforts were both practical and symbolic. Cultivating the land was a means of survival, but it also represented reclamation and rootedness, a physical assertion that Jews would endure, thrive, and shape the future of their homeland. While life in Palestine was focused on rebuilding, it was also politically charged. British authorities maintained strict control over immigration, wary of demographic shifts that could threaten colonial interests. Smuggling networks continued to operate, helping thousands of displaced Jews arrive despite restrictions. These clandestine operations reflected not only the desperation of refugees but also the growing international support for a Jewish homeland. The post-war influx intensified tensions between the British, the growing Arab population, and Jewish immigrants, laying the groundwork for complex geopolitical developments that would culminate in the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. Amid these challenges, the immigrant communities remained resilient, navigating political friction while continuing to expand settlements, schools, and economic enterprises. In the United States, survivors faced a different but equally complex set of challenges. Entering through the Displaced Persons Act and other post-war immigration policies, Jews arrived in American cities that were recovering from economic depression and wartime mobilization. Integration required adaptation to new languages, unfamiliar social norms, and economic realities. Many found work in manufacturing, small businesses, or professional sectors, contributing to urban growth while stabilizing their own lives. At the same time, the United States offered opportunities for education, professional advancement, and cultural engagement that were previously impossible under the restrictive conditions of wartime Europe. Immigrant neighborhoods became hubs of communal support, with synagogues, schools, cultural societies, and social clubs serving as vital anchors for identity and continuity. Education emerged as a central pillar for both Palestine and the United States. For children and young adults, schools were more than places of learning. They were sanctuaries of hope, spaces to recover from trauma, and platforms for cultural preservation. Curriculum in Palestine emphasized Hebrew language, Jewish history, and Zionist ideals, blending practical skills with national consciousness. In American cities, Jewish schools sought to maintain cultural heritage while preparing students to thrive in a new social environment. Teachers, many of whom were survivors themselves, became conduits for memory, passing on lessons of resilience, perseverance, and identity that would shape a generation. These educational efforts ensured that the legacy of survival was carried forward, not just as a memory of suffering but as a foundation for life and achievement. Cultural revival went hand in hand with economic and social reconstruction. In Palestine, theaters, literary societies, newspapers, and music ensembles flourished. Survivors found solace and expression in the arts, using creativity to process trauma and envision a future shaped by hope rather than fear. Similarly, in the United States, Jewish immigrants contributed to the arts, literature, journalism, and public discourse, integrating European influences with American opportunities. Community centers organized celebrations of Jewish festivals, commemorations of the Holocaust, and forums for political engagement, reinforcing social cohesion and cultural pride. Through these activities, Jewish migrants reclaimed agency, transforming the narrative from one of victimhood to one of active participation in society and culture. Psychologically, the journey of rebuilding was complex. Survivors carried deep scars, having witnessed or experienced atrocities that defied comprehension. Counseling, peer support, and communal rituals became critical tools for recovery. In DP camps, discussions about migration choices, storytelling, and cultural events helped survivors process loss and trauma. In Palestine and the United States, similar mechanisms were at work. Social networks, religious observance, and cultural programming provided spaces to grieve, remember, and yet move forward. The act of building schools, businesses, and neighborhoods was itself therapeutic, offering purpose and structure after years of chaos. The broader international context influenced these migrations and settlements. Pressure from global Jewish organizations, advocacy from sympathetic governments, and media coverage of the Holocaust's horrors helped shape immigration policies, aid programs, and settlement initiatives. Political developments, particularly in Palestine, created both opportunities and challenges. Jewish immigrants had to navigate complex dynamics involving local Arab populations, British administrative authority, and internal debates within the Jewish community about strategy, identity, and governance. In the United States, Cold War politics, domestic policy, and emerging human rights discourse influenced the integration and reception of refugees. In both regions, Jewish communities leveraged international attention and support to maximize the impact of migration and settlement efforts. By the early 1950s, these rebuilding efforts had transformed the landscape of Jewish life. In Palestine, agricultural settlements, urban communities, and educational institutions had grown significantly, creating a foundation for the emerging state of Israel. In the United States, immigrant populations had established strong neighborhoods, thriving cultural institutions, and influential civic organizations. Survivors had transitioned from desperate refugees to active participants in society, shaping both local communities and broader national narratives. The migration and reconstruction experience reinforced a sense of identity, resilience, and global interconnectedness that continues to define Jewish communities today. Chapter 3 thus tells the story of transition, from survival to reconstruction, from displacement to integration, and from trauma to cultural revival. It captures the immense human effort, resourcefulness, and determination that enabled survivors to transform new lands into homes, neighborhoods into communities, and memories of loss into acts of resilience. From the fields of Palestine to the urban centers of America, Jewish migrants forged futures that honored the past while shaping a lasting legacy of endurance, creativity, and hope. Legacy of survival and the birth of a global diaspora. By the mid-1950s, the story of Jewish migration during and after World War II had entered a new phase, one not defined solely by survival or immediate resettlement, but by the long-term shaping of communities, identities, and global influence. The survivors who had made it to Palestine, the United States, and other countries now face the challenge of transforming their existence from one of refuge into a meaningful life. The scars of the past remained, yet these individuals were increasingly focused on creating stability, prosperity, and cultural continuity for themselves and future generations. The migration that had once been a desperate escape had now become the foundation of a dynamic, transnational Jewish network that would leave a lasting mark on the world. In Palestine, Jewish immigrants became central actors in the creation of the State of Israel. The settlement projects initiated immediately after the war had grown into thriving communities, combining agricultural innovation, urban development, and social institutions. Survivors contributed their labor, professional skills, and organizational expertise, transforming towns and kibbutzim into functional economic and cultural hubs. The diversity of immigrants from Eastern European shtetls to German cities created a mosaic of cultural traditions that enriched the social fabric of the emerging nation. Education was prioritized, with schools teaching Hebrew, Jewish history, and civic responsibility, instilling a sense of shared identity that would serve as the bedrock of national cohesion. The formation of Israel in 1948 marked a turning point for Jewish survivors worldwide. For those in Palestine, statehood symbolized not only political sovereignty but also the culmination of a decades-long aspiration for safety, self-determination, and communal restoration. For Jews in the United States and other countries, Israel's creation became a focal point for identity, philanthropy, and cultural connection. Diaspora communities mobilized to support the new state through financial contributions, advocacy, and immigration sponsorship. This transnational relationship reinforced the sense that Jewish survival was not only about individual safety but also about collective empowerment, demonstrating the resilience and agency of communities that had once been targeted for annihilation. Meanwhile, Jewish survivors in the United States continued to integrate into American society while shaping it profoundly. By the 1950s and 1960s, they had established thriving neighborhoods, professional networks, and cultural institutions. Synagogues, community centers, and Jewish schools served as anchors, preserving traditions while adapting to a new national context. Survivors and their descendants became educators, doctors, lawyers, journalists, and artists, contributing to the civic, cultural, and economic life of their cities. They also became advocates for Holocaust remembrance, working to ensure that the atrocities of the war were neither forgotten nor repeated. Organizations such as the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee and survivor networks played critical roles in fostering community cohesion, providing social services, and connecting families scattered by the war. Cultural revival remained a central component of post-war Jewish life. Survivors wrote memoirs, composed music, and created art that expressed the pain, resilience, and hope of their experiences. In Palestine, theaters, newspapers, and literary societies flourished, integrating European artistic traditions with emerging Israeli culture. In the United States, Holocaust memoirs, plays, and community storytelling preserved memory while educating new generations. Through these creative endeavors, Jewish migrants transformed personal trauma into collective legacy, ensuring that the story of survival remained alive across continents and generations. The migration and resettlement experience also had profound social and demographic effects. In Palestine, immigrants helped to populate regions that had been sparsely inhabited, contributing to agricultural development, urban planning, and national defense. In the United States, Jewish neighborhoods expanded, forming vibrant urban communities that integrated into the broader social and economic landscape. These population movements reshaped both local and global demographics, linking communities across the Atlantic through familial ties, cultural exchanges, and political activism. The resulting diaspora was not merely a collection of displaced individuals but a globally connected network capable of influencing politics, culture, and international relations. Education and youth engagement became crucial in consolidating this legacy. Schools, youth groups, and cultural programs ensured that the children of survivors understood their history while being equipped to navigate new societies. In Palestine, education reinforced national identity, preparing the younger generation for citizenship in the new state. In the United States, schools balanced cultural preservation with integration, enabling students to participate fully in American society without losing connection to their heritage. Across both continents, education served as a bridge between memory and future, embedding resilience, cultural awareness, and civic responsibility in the post-war generation. Political and social activism became another defining feature of Jewish life in the post-war era. Survivors and their descendants engaged in advocacy for human rights, international justice, and refugee support, informed by their own experiences of persecution. Organizations formed to document war crimes, promote Holocaust remembrance, and lobby governments to prevent future genocides. These efforts reinforced a sense of moral responsibility that extended beyond immediate communities, illustrating how migration and survival could give rise to global citizenship and activism rooted in shared experience and ethical imperatives. The global Jewish diaspora that emerged from this period was remarkable for its cohesion and adaptability. Connections between Palestine/Israel and communities in the United States, Canada, Europe, and elsewhere facilitated economic, cultural, and political exchange. Family networks spanned continents, enabling migration assistance, business development, and cultural reinforcement. Jewish festivals, religious observances, and commemorations were maintained across borders, creating a sense of unity despite geographic separation. In many ways, the post-war migration experience had transformed Jewish identity, linking survival, cultural preservation, and global interconnectedness into a powerful and enduring legacy. By the late 1950s, the impact of post-war migration was evident in every sphere of Jewish life. Communities had recovered from immediate trauma and begun to thrive, institutions were firmly established, and cultural and educational networks ensured the continuity of memory and identity. Survivors had transitioned from being victims of history to active participants in shaping it, influencing societies in Israel, the United States, and beyond. Their resilience not only restored life but also created enduring structures for culture, education, civic engagement, and international solidarity, leaving a legacy that continues to influence Jewish communities worldwide today. Chapter 4, therefore, completes the arc of Jewish migration during and after World War II. It is a story of transformation from the despair of displacement to the triumph of reconstruction, from the struggle for survival to the creation of vibrant communities, and from fragmented existence to a globally connected diaspora. The legacy of this migration endures not merely in demographic statistics or urban settlements, but in the very identity, resilience, and cultural richness of Jewish communities around the world. It is a testament to the human capacity to overcome destruction, preserve memory, and create a future grounded in hope, solidarity, and enduring life.